today we'll hear from a panel of those associated with the Truth, Justice and Healing Council in respect of their proposal in relation to a Catholic professional standards company.
Gentlemen, welcome. You each need to be sworn, and I assume you'll all take the oath on the Bible?
Yes.
I think, Your Honour, I have been sworn in already, or do I need to do it again?
Did I let you go?
You didn't.
Okay, no, you can stay seated. Thanks, Archbishop. For the other two, if you'd stand, take the Bible and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give to this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat. Yes, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Your Honour. Mr Owen, can I begin with you? Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Neville John Owen.
And the relative position you have to this hearing?
Since the middle of 2014, I've been the chair of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council.
Thank you. And Archbishop, your full name?
Mark Benedict Coleridge.
You're the Archbishop of Brisbane.
The Archbishop of Brisbane.
Mr Sullivan, your full name?
Francis John Sullivan, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council.
How long have you held that position?
Formally appointed in December 2012.
And Mr Owen, I think you are the second chair of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council, that's right?
Correct.
Thank you. Perhaps if I could start with you, Mr Owen, and if you could tell the Royal Commission what the purpose and role of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council is?
The Truth, Justice and Healing Council was set up by the Catholic Religious Australia, which is the body that represents about 180 or so of the major religious congregations, and the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, which represents the dioceses and eparchies in Australia. And it was set up for the purpose of creating a situation where the Church could, wherever possible, speak with one voice in its dealings with the Royal Commission.
And with one voice, you refer to dioceses and orders rather than individuals within those?
That's correct.
And the Royal Commission can assume, I take it, that where the Council has published views, those views represent the views of the members?
That's my understanding.
Now, given your role and purpose, is it intended that the Council will have any ongoing role in relation to the implementation of whatever policies the Church end up adopting?
It is likely, I think, that the Truth, Justice and Healing Council will go out of existence. It was set up for a particular purpose, that is to liaise with the Royal Commission. That is now coming towards an end. And I doubt very much that the Truth, Justice and Healing Council as a council will continue to exist after the Royal Commission has reported. The timing of its demise will, of course, be a matter for the supervisory group. In relation to Catholic Professional Standards Limited, we will be available to assist the directors and the members in the implementation phase of that, which would include passing on the knowledge that we've developed concerning the preparation and implementation of standards, but we wouldn't have any formal ongoing role.
Therefore, to understand the intentions towards implementation, the Royal Commission must look towards those members of the Church who are involved in that work.
The company was only formed late last year. It was publicly announced in late November. It is very much in its embryonic stage. There are 3 initial directors who have been appointed, and they are going about the task of appointing a chief executive officer and assembling the remainder of the board. So there, in terms of the intention, I think probably It's the Truth, Justice and Healing Council at the moment that is best placed to assist the Commission in understanding what the intention was and is behind the establishment of the company.
But the proposals in relation to the work going forward and the various policies and procedures which the Royal Commission has been provided with, that lays with those who are the leadership of the Church now.
It does, and of course, primarily with the directors of the company.
In terms of the policies and procedures of the individual dioceses?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. No, the policies and procedures of the individual diocese remain with the diocese, and gradually, as CPS comes into its operational phase, it will liaise with the diocese and the congregations in relation to those policies and procedures.
CPS being the Catholic Professional Standards Company?
Correct.
Thank you. Can I then turn to the details of the company? You have in your submission to the Royal Commission, which is Exhibit 54, tab 1, which is the tender bundle for the hearing. And it begins on page 90 of that document. Do you have it with you, Mr. Owen?
I do. You begin in the first paragraph by acknowledging that the Church's professional standards in relation to child protection allegations have not been consistently and adequately applied by all Church authorities. Correct.
And those professional standards can be found in what documents?
Mainly in Towards Healing and in integrity in ministry and integrity in the service of the Church.
What about the Melbourne response?
And the Melbourne response is a separate issue, yes.
In terms of consistency, the Melbourne response clearly differs from Towards Healing.
It does.
But you're not referring specifically to that in the first paragraph?
No, we are referring to inconsistency within the other standards as well.
So the way in which, in relation to Towards Healing, individual dioceses applied it?
Correct.
Now, that is in relation to application rather than content. So is it the case where to understand it that no issue is being taken with the content, it's more how indeed it's been applied?
I think that's fair, yes. The content is the content, the words are there. But it's become clear through the case studies and generally that there has been inconsistent application of the words in Towards Healing and perhaps also in the other standards.
Now, coming further down the page, you refer to a criticism of Towards Healing, but of the in-house nature of the process.
Yes.
See that?
Yes.
And again, that's in relation to case studies and the Church's own view, I take it, of its policy?
Certainly in relation to the case studies. I think, as with most things in life, people take different views. I couldn't make a statement that says that all Church authorities have the same view of that, but many do.
And the concern was about the independence, the transparency and the lack of a mechanism for supervision and enforcement.
Yes.
And presumably the new proposed body, or the fact that it's in existence but as yet not become operational, is designed to deal with those three issues and probably among other issues?
In a way, the area of complaints handling has to be looked at separately, because the core functions of the Catholic professional standards would involve the setting of standards in a wide range of areas. One of those will be complaints handling. To the extent that it does set standards in relation to complaints handling, the intent would certainly be to address the deficiencies in towards healing that have been identified.
The matters that I've just referred to aren't limited to complaint handling, I don't think, Mr Owen. The first is the in-house nature of the process, that is, that it was being carried out by people associated with the church. That's right.
There's a difficulty, I think. If you take the view that was expressed, for example, by Father Tom Doyle, that one of the real failings of the church here is its failure to acknowledge and to use a pastoral approach to its dealings with survivors, it's difficult to take everything outside. In my thinking, I like to differentiate between what I call claims resolution on the one hand and complaint handling on the other. Now, some people will want their claim resolved. That can go outside the church. Other people will want the church to take responsibility for what has happened. And so I find it difficult to see how it can always, as a broad statement, always be something other than in-house.
In terms of transparency or being subject to scrutiny, that, I take it, is a reflection of the processes not being publicly known and various deeds of release and the like.
Yes, and not having a mechanism by which the public can assess the adequacy of the procedures.
Thank you. Now, you then refer to another criticism that those involved in dealing with a particular case have been poorly chosen or insufficiently skilled or trained.
Yes.
And that's in relation to those within the diocese who were dealing with the complainants and ultimately resolving the complaint.
Yes.
And again, the idea is to set up a structure which resolves that as well as the other issues.
Well, that will provide the guidance for resolving those sorts of problems.
Thank you. Now, you then refer to the council recommending to the ACBC, the conference, and the Catholic Religious Australia, that a new independently structured company be established to set professional standards and to monitor and report on their implementation.
Yes.
Now, when you say independently structured, that's independent from who?
Can I sound a little donnish here?
By all means, Mr Owen.
We do not shy away from the fact that this company is not structurally independent of the institutional church. The institutional church will fund it. And it's the same issue that arose and Miss Devlin addressed in her evidence concerning the Irish model. So we don't shy away from that. It is not structurally independent. I've written from time to time on issues relating to governance, directors' duties and so on. And I've always taken a view that you must distinguish between structural independence and functional independence. I've always been concerned about the terminology that we used in the corporate field about independent directors, because I think that is misleading. Because every director must be independent. If they're not independent, then they can't fulfil their fiduciary duties. So you look at functional independence, and by functional independence, I mean the capacity to bring an objective, dispassionate and informed mind to the decision-making process. And when we talk about independent in that submission and in the structure of Catholic professional standards, what I'm referring to is functional independence, a situation where those who are operating the company, managing the company and making the decisions at that level will be functionally independent.
So we should read that paragraph as, instead of independently structured, functionally structured. so as to be independent.
Correct.
Now, moving down the page of your submission, you refer to the focus of attention on setting and auditing compliance with professional standards, and that the company will not investigate or deal with individual complaints. Now, in terms of the dealing with individual complaints, is it proposed that the complaint handling process, which now sits within either Towards Healing or the Melbourne response, will continue?
That's a matter for the company, and that is something that the standards will have to address. Because it's, as you've seen, as the Commission will have seen, particularly last week, there are other models that are now operating. So there are numerous ways of approaching these problems. What we had hoped, and this was one of the assumptions underlying this, was that there would be a government-administered redress scheme so that what I call claims resolution could be done outside the church, and people, the survivors who choose to go down that route can do so. So that the individual complaints that come to the church authority will still be dealt with by the church authority, but subject to the guidelines, the standards and the principles that are set by Catholic Professional Standards Limited, and that's going to require a pretty significant period of consultations to work out how best to do that. Would you go to one national model? Would you allow each church authority to develop its own model, provided that they always complied with the set of standards, policies and principles that are in the standards set by Catholic Professional Standards? Now, that's something that I can't answer today, Ms Furness, but that is where this will have to go.
So it is expected that the company will set the standards, and as part of that process, perhaps a consultation process, advise whether or not a national scheme is preferable to various independent schemes.
Correct.
Now, just continuing over, this is on page 91 of your submission, you refer to the company not being structurally independent but functionally independent, subject to the reserve powers. Now, you then refer to the reserve powers a little later on. Perhaps you can explain those.
Can I say that in corporate organisations that have developed in the Catholic world over the last 20 or so years, and this was a matter to which one of the witnesses in the first week referred, to see reserve powers is not uncommon. They differ from time to time, but what it means is that you're looking at uncharted waters often for an organisation, and this is an example. This is going into areas that the bishops and the congregational leaders have not before been. So that there are some reserve powers which are there to assist everyone to get confidence in the system. Do you want me to go?
Certainly.
How would you like me to do this?
Well, I'm happy if you want to complete your answer, or if that's sufficient for your purposes, we can move on. Mr. Owen?
I'm happy.
We'll come to the terms of the document shortly, but the primary goal of it is to set the standards and enforce those standards that it's set.
Correct.
Thank you.
And to educate and train.
Thank you. And if you continue down, you refer to the authorities being required to enter into a contract with the company and agree that compliance will be audited and the results made public. How will that requirement be affected?
Which requirement?
The requirement of the authorities to enter into a contract.
It'll be much the same as the Irish experience, where there will be dealings between the the Catholic Professional Standards Limited and the church authorities, that's the diocese and the major religious institutions, in which the nature of the contractual arrangement will be hammered out. As we heard from Ms Devlin, that's gone through changes from time to time, and I have no doubt that that's what will happen here. But it will be a case of consultation, drafts, redrafts, and then a contractually binding arrangement by which the church authorities agree to comply with, to honour and comply with the standards and to submit themselves to audit of the level of their compliance and application of those standards, and to take on board the public reporting of the results of the audits.
Are you expecting that each of the major dioceses and orders will participate?
Yes.
And that expectation is based on consultation?
That expectation comes from the fact that the approval to this initiative was given by both the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, which is constituted by the dioceses and eparchies, and by Catholic Religious Australia, which is constituted by the major religious organisations.
Mr Owen, Towards Healing, I think, was a product of the bishops, wasn't it?
Yes.
And as I understand it, and I think you confirmed, it hasn't always been applied by the different dioceses.
Yes.
How can we have confidence then going forward with this new initiative?
Because there's an audit requirement that it wasn't in that initial arrangement, and it's an audit requirement which we backed by public reporting.
But how do we know they'll all come in?
We can only go on the fact that this has been through a long period of discussion and consultation. Various views were expressed, all sorts of reservations were expressed and held from time to time. So I think the fact that there has been an endorsement by those two bodies is one thing that you can go on. And the nature of the discussions which have been carried out give me certainly some confidence. I can't give any guarantees. I think Ms Devlin said that in the rewrite of their memoranda of understandings or memorandum of agreement, there are some that are still on the outside of the tent. I can't give any guarantees, but those two things, the nature of the discussions and the endorsement by the organisations, give me, I'll withdraw that, are things that you, the commissioners, could look at to have some confidence that this is more than just window dressing or words.
Is it intended that the bishop or provincial enter into the contract?
Correct.
Now, the responsibilities nevertheless remain with the diocese or order?
Yes.
So the standards are created by the body, and when promulgated, those standards are required through the contract with the bishop to be followed?
Yes.
And then it's the responsibility of the bishop to ensure that that happens?
Correct.
How does the bishop ensure that those beneath him comply? How does that intended to work?
That is something that will no doubt be part of this overall system. There is some level of that already. For example, with the Catholic education systems, and we've heard that there are different models, but where a Catholic education system which is responsible to government, but which is acting on a delegated authority from the bishops, as is the case in Western Australia, for example, there are mechanisms in place, reporting mechanisms, between the directors of Catholic Education and the Catholic Education Commission, and between the Catholic Education Commission and the directors and the bishops. So it's already in some areas that is already in place. But I would imagine that there will be guidance notes similar to the ones about which Ms Devlin spoke, which will go into detail on that sort of thing. And it comes back to something that Commissioner Murray mentioned about stress testing. How do you stress test all of this? These are things that just have to be worked out.
In terms of the priest and the bishop, are you suggesting that there might be some form of delegation similar to the Catholic Education Commission?
I wouldn't think so. Not a delegation as such, other than to the extent which there is delegation already. Parish priests, for example, do have a certain amount of autonomy separate from the bishop under canon law. So there's already that in place. I wouldn't have thought that there would be expressed delegation of these sorts of standards, for example, particularly child safety standards. If the bishop adopts a child safety standard or protocol for application within his diocese, I can't imagine that he would delegate to the parish priest an authority, for example, to tinker with it and apply it in part or not at all.
What happens if the parish priest doesn't comply with the standards?
Then there's going to be an adverse audit report on the bishop. So the bishop has to use...
Perhaps if I can repeat the question for you. What happens if the parish priest doesn't comply with the standards?
There will be an adverse audit report that will be published.
What power does the bishop have to require the parish priest to comply with the standards?
That's the normal situation that applies in canon law between the bishop and his priest. I can't really take that any further than that. Perhaps someone else on the panel may be able to give you a more specific answer to that, as to what the actual powers of the bishop are to deal with a recalcitrant individual.
If the priest doesn't follow the standards, the bishop has power under canon law to effectively stand him down?
That's right, yes.
And that power would be able to be exercised in relation to failing to comply with the standard, I take it?
It could.
Thank you. Now,
before you move on, Justice Owen, I think you're still referred to in that way.
Depends whether it's my grandchildren or someone outside.
One of the difficulties with enforcement is if the person who is subject to enforcement is independent. And we understand that whilst there are employee-like relationships between a bishop and a priest, the priest is functionally independent. And therefore, for enforcement and audit to be effective, it would seem to me that not only would the diocese and the bishop have to sign up to the standards, but also the priests, because otherwise they could simply legitimately defy any enforcement over them. Given that peculiar nature of the religious relationship in employment law, do you think that it's necessary for the priests themselves to agree contractually to this obligation?
I don't think it would operate where there was a contractual arrangement between the priest and Catholic Professional Standards Limited. But as I understand, I can only speak from the West Australian experience, but as I understand the safeguarding protocols that operate in the West Australian environment, the priests sign a code of conduct to be bound by those standards and to apply those standards. That's as I understand it. I may be wrong in that, but that's as I understand it. So that would be the mechanism, I think, But that's not a code of conduct would not be a code of conduct between the priest and Catholic Professional Standards Limited. It would be between the priest and his ordinary.
So it's the case that existing standards imposed by contract or law legislation, such as educational standards and out-of-home care standards, will not be replicated or otherwise interfered with by the standards that the company will set.
That was a linchpin of this arrangement. Particularly the education authorities made it abundantly clear that they didn't want to be put in a position where they were having to do twice the paperwork and undergo twice the audit pain for the same result. So that the standards that are set by governments and for example, the child safe standards in Victoria under the recent ministerial order, they will apply, they will have to be honoured, they will be part of the standards, but they won't be separately audited. So if the authority concerned can demonstrate that it has complied with the regulatory regime to the satisfaction of the government regulatory agency, it won't have to do all of that again.
Impossible. Check the system, but it has to be fixed. But I'm sorry, gentlemen, I think we should stop and just clear it up. We'll adjourn for a short time.